So now I think we've got past all our technical difficulties and I can pass you over to Ian Kalra,
yep,
who's going to present on shared space and give us a 10-minute presentation just to explain the thinking behind it, and then we can go to some questions from the floor.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Harry. Yeah, we had a few IT issues, I think, and now we've managed to get stereo, so I suppose that's one good thing. Okay, well, thanks for inviting us, Harry. My name is Ian Kalra, I'm Head of Transportation Services at the Council. I brought with me over there, sitting in the corner, Simon Philp, who's Project Manager, works in my teams, and Simon's been involved in delivering a lot of projects around the town, and more recently the scheme at Boscombe at the end of the precinct, which we're here to talk about. Yeah, we're just going to talk for about 10 minutes, just a little bit over 10 minutes, just to go back. I thought it was worth revisiting where the scheme came from, why we did it, the objectives. Why don't we talk a little bit about that and one or two other things, and then I'm going to get Simon, who's sort of been more involved in the delivery of this scheme in detail, to talk about some of the monitoring we've carried out since the scheme was finalised, and sort of also to talk about some of the common threads from the comments we received, the observations we've made on site, and looking at what initiatives we're going to carry out to address those issues. So just about 10 minutes really. And then at the end of that, I'm very pleased for your feedback, your observations, and we'll try our best to answer any questions that pitched at us. Right, so yeah, just in terms of where did the scheme come from and why did we do it? I mean, the first thing was probably over 4 or 5 years ago, we were looking at a road safety scheme along the particular area that we've delivered the shared space and the adjoining improvements. There's been a long-standing accident cluster in this area, and as you can see from the slide there, over a 10-year period there's been 27 personal injury accidents. So these are where the casualties have resulted from the accidents, which we get information from police data and statistics on a monthly basis. There are probably lots of other shunts that go on that we never hear about, to be honest with you. But we sort of, in terms of road safety, we prioritise our initiatives, obviously dependent on these clusters and how we can intervene and sort of come up with solutions to make the situation safer. And on that slide, it just sort of identified by the dots, but you could see that the accidents were fairly evenly spread out around the zone from the Crescent through to Centenary Way. But then we hadn't progressed that. We started to design that. Obviously, these sort of interventions are very expensive, and we've got competing priorities in terms of our transport budget. So we were looking at this, but haven't got that far. Then, in terms of chronology, the Boscombe Regeneration Partnership commissioned a study by a consultant called Hamilton Bailey, whose brief was to come back with recommendations at how to uplift the economy of the precinct and surrounding areas, particularly in terms of retail and the local town centre. And the main recommendation that he came back with was to open up the entrances to the precinct, particularly on the west side, where there was because of the layout of the infrastructure, it was a very unwelcoming environment, where there were lots of barriers really, and almost an appearance of we're not welcome here, keep out. You can't even see a way into it. And particularly a recommendation to introduce a shared space type of concept scheme in that area, which was then adopted by the council. Somewhat coincidentally, in our transport area, we'd had an opportunity to apply for some significant additional funding from central government, from the Department of Transport, for sustainable transport funding through a number of different bidding opportunities. And we were very delighted that we were successful on all our 3 bids, which basically allowed, and the objectives of these transport initiatives were firstly to reduce carbon emissions, which you'd expect, but also to strengthen the local economy. So it's aligned perfectly with the Boscombe Regeneration aspirations in this particular area. So we sort of combined the objectives that I've talked about and had the money then to deliver a scheme in this area, which was identified in the bid as one of our key deliverables. And I'd stress that this was additional grant funding from central government. So we designed a scheme from a feasibility layouts from St John's Road Junction all the way through round the bend to St Deary Way, and consulted on it. Simon was heavily involved in that, and the resulting sort of feedback we got from the consultation, and there were a large number of questions, but just highlighting one. 53% of the people who did respond were in favour of the shared space proposal, 30% against, and the other 17% either didn't know or couldn't make their minds up. So it was, significantly in favour, and I can take you through lots of other transport consultations we carry out. It often is 50-50. It's amazing actually how, with something new, how people, so roughly half I think are for it and half are against it, which is quite strange. Can you move on? Okay. In terms of the scheme itself, so I imagine a lot of the questions would be around and concerns around the concept of shared space, what it's about, why is it dangerous, I suppose. The sort of key ethos behind it is the first thing is that you need to design the layout in a way that reduces traffic speed. That's an absolute imperative. And there's lots of different shared space schemes across the country now, ranging from shared space on really complicated junctions, I've seen, right down to quite simple locations, which actually the Boscombe location is fairly straightforward compared to others around the country. And in terms of our the way we've attempted to reduce the speed, and we'll talk about that a bit later because we've got some statistics on that. We've done that by designing transition zones into the main shared space area, which is effectively around the bend. And the transition zone, you'll know this anyway, basically run in the eastbound direction from the Crescent to the bend, and the southbound direction from the St Deary Way roundabout to the bend. And the interventions we've included, but basically change the highway layout to narrow the roads and change the horizontal and vertical alignment, make it a little bit more pedestrian dominated with some of the crossings we put in. I would say that the other thing about shared space is that the idea is that it encourages all people to take additional care, I suppose that's the right way to say it, when using the space, as it does, it can introduce some uncertainty to who has the priority. That's actually more important and more the case on the more complicated junction arrangements when there's a lack of priority given to who's allowed out either from the main road or the side road. So it's less actually relevant in this area, I think. Just moving on to, well, it's probably worth just looking at this. Actually, this is interesting. We always take photographs of the layout before we start, this, you know, for many different reasons. And we were just looking at a few of the photographs the other day of the before scenario, and it's very interesting that you know, to think we actually are very used to sharing a space anyway. You think about, you know, just crossing the road anywhere. There's often, you know, limited places where there are controlled crossings or uncontrolled crossings. People have to make decisions, you know, in terms of, and do make decisions in terms of crossing in gaps in the traffic. And the idea of Boscombe is that we're reducing the speed of the traffic to make those decisions easy. In terms of the, go back to the last slide, please. So in terms of the objectives of the scheme, what we started off trying to achieve, I've talked about reduced traffic speeds, and we'll talk a bit about that in a minute. One thing that might not have been noticeable was we, on these transition zones, on the approaches to the corner, we made the decision to carry out some maintenance to the carriageway structure, rather than have to come back in 2 or 3 years and resurface it, or we didn't think that would go down very well. So we found some money out of our maintenance part to do that, which is why you'd probably be aware that we had to close the road for 2 separate weeks during the scheme. We've radically improved the street lighting. We've reduced obstructions to traffic or congestion by relocating the bus stop. We've improved the bus facilities themselves by high quality design, new shelters, additional seating, and we've installed a state-of-the-art real-time information, new state-of-the-art real-time information system and screens. We've made it better for pedestrians, increased width of footways, and cleared unnecessary street clutter. And a key part of our design process was sort of consulting in regard to accessibility and disability. And our chief consultee is Dogs Disability, who some of you may have heard of. And through discussions with them, we made a decision to do 2 things. One was to install an upstand to a curb, which we'll talk about later because it's caused some knock-on problems, to be honest, which we found we're sort of looking at. And the second thing was to rebuild a controlled crossing to one end of the shared space, one end of the bend. But basically in terms of disability for people who have sight problems, difficulties. But it also affords, you know, a crossing point for anybody who doesn't feel comfortable or confident in crossing on the corner, and it's not that many metres away from it. And the other 2 objectives were to increase driver awareness of pedestrians crossing, and we've done that by in these zones, these leading zones, to create a number of what we call courtesy crossings, where we've narrowed the road, we've raised the road slightly, and we've built the crossings in different materials, and people find it easier to cross there. And likewise at the side roads, we've given greater priority to pedestrians by raising the level of the carriageway up to the footway level and colouring it so you know, it's better for pedestrians and drivers know to slow down. That's probably my bit, isn't it, Simon?
Yeah.
So Simon's now going to talk for just a few minutes on the monitoring we carried out and so on, and then just on these issues that cropped up and initiatives we're looking at.
Thank you, Ian. As Ian said, I've been more involved in the practical side and more recently involved in the monitoring of the scheme since it's been implemented. One of the main parts of this, and the most important to us, was our speed surveys. Before starting the scheme, we actually carried out a speed survey on the road, and we've repeated that now after the scheme has been implemented. We're quite pleased with our results, and our average speeds have dropped 10% on both approaches from 22 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour Christchurch Road and 20 miles an hour to 70 miles an hour on Palmerston Road. Although we quote the average speeds on there, we often actually, as part of our design guidance, have to work on what we call the 85th percentile for speeds. That's the speed at which 85% of drivers are travelling at or less. And again, we've seen good reductions in both of those, from 27 to 24 on Christchurch Road and from 26 to 21 on Palmerston Road. We are now considering further changes to install a 20-mile-an-hour zone. We think that will be complementing the speed we're already achieving and may even encourage further reductions in speed. Okay, I've spent quite a lot of time on the site since we've installed it, and on many occasions been spoken to by members of the public. One of their favourite questions is, why are the benches in the road? Well, the simple answer is they're not. Although the benches are located in front of the curbs, they're not actually located in the road. The curbs we've installed, as Ian suggested earlier, were installed for visually impaired users, not to demark the road from the footpath. We have actually installed the planters as a delineation from the carriageway space to the pedestrian space. Can we take the questions at the end if possible? Thank you. So as I said, so although we've installed these in that location, it isn't a road and that's not where we're intending it to be. I will cover it later a bit more, but we are actually going to be replacing these planters. They are only temporary, and that's not the permanent solution to what we're doing, but has allowed us a chance to test the water and choose the right locations for what we use to delineate the road. But I will come on to that more later. Another favourite topic that seems to be rising more often now is about people tripping on the curb. We were first made aware of this when we were finishing the scheme on site by the traders reporting that there had been multiple people tripping over on the curb, as a result of which we installed a row of stainless steel studs to help try and improve the conspicuity of that curb and prevent it. It would prove that subsequently we are still having issues, and we have had some additional reports of tripping since. So as a result, we've now investigated some alternatives. We've trialled out various options in marking the curb and how best to do so. We've gone through a safety audit on that process, and we are looking to install some markings to the curb before the end of the month. Again, it's important to highlight, Ian briefly touched on it earlier, but the reason for the curb being installed was for the visually impaired. It's critical for the visually impaired to have a 60mm curb height for all users or visually impaired users to use the space. That's identified by people with guide dogs, white sticks, and those who are partially sighted. And that is why we actually consequently had the curb. Originally, the scheme did have no curb, and there would have been no delineation. That may have helped our argument for the benches not actually being in the road, but as a balance for those users, we felt it was critical to install them. The restricted parking zone also seems to be quite controversial at the moment, and there seems to be a bit of misunderstanding on how it works. The simple rule is park in the marked bays. If you park in the marked bays, you're in the right place. We've got big gateway signs on all approaches. There's repeater signs in every location where you may choose to park illegally. And we've actually increased the number of those signs way beyond the requirement within the guidance to try and encourage users. We have actually also carried out a CCTV survey of those who are parking illegally or outside of these areas. And unfortunately, a lot of those users are doing so deliberately, we believe. On many occasions, the wardens would turn up and the person would either be waiting in their car or be running out from the shop to move their car before the warden could give them a ticket. So although we do appreciate yellow lines aren't on the road, we don't believe that would make any difference to the uptake of how it's working. And even more so, there were multiple people who were parking in the bus stop, which is clearly marked with a large yellow line and all the adequate signing, and people still chose to abuse the marking and the regulations. Okay, so this is going back to the planters which we've installed, which were at a temporary basis. We are looking to put a more permanent solution in. That permanent solution is going to be along the lines of a concrete steel, we believe, is the current form. We do need to go through a process to select the final product, and we have to go through safety audits for this. But we are working with manufacturers to choose the most suitable product for the area to increase the conspicuity of the road delineation. In addition, although the planters we've used a minimum number at the moment, We will be looking at putting more of these in than we do currently have planters, which should help improve awareness of the road space. And finally, what we're doing now really, additional signing. Currently the Department of Transport don't permit a sign for shared space, although they are consulting on a new sign. We weren't able to put one in originally because of this reason, but we are now going to preempt the outcome of this consultation and install on both approaches a shared space sign in line with what is proposed to be accepted for the space. There is a risk that that sign has to be changed if the regulations don't follow through, but we will always be able to put some form of sign which will increase awareness of the shared space. As I touched on earlier, we will be consulting on a 20-mile-an-hour zone, the extent of which is to be agreed. 20-mile-an-hour zones are not always that popular in terms of enforcement because of it's difficult to get speeds down, which is why originally it was left off the scheme. Now we are proving we are getting speeds down to the nature we would expect. The 20-mile-an-hour zone will complement that and may encourage further reductions. We need to respond to our disability audit, although it says we are waiting a response. We actually did receive it yesterday. I briefly flicked through it and overall it's a positive document. We can make that document public once we've responded to the recommendations within it, and we'll do so. We will be installing the concrete spheres or the product that is selected for the bend once we know to replace the planters. We are going to be installing, hopefully in the next few weeks, the markings of the curbs. And we will continue to monitor the scheme, much in line with what the Sergeant said earlier. We actually, people don't report issues to us, we're not aware of it. The tripping is a great example. Every time someone tells us there's someone tripping, I've had less than 5 reports of people tripping in the space. Each one of those 5 have told me that multiple people have told them it's happening all the time. What we need is for the public to tell us their problems and make us aware of it. And hopefully this public forum will allow you to give us some feedback today. But it is critical you tell us if something's not working, because we can't change it if we don't know it's a problem. And the final step will be our final safety audit. 12 months to 18 months after the scheme is completed, we carry out a safety audit. That's an independent safety auditor who comes along, looks at the scheme, looks at how it works, monitors the accidents we've had during that period, and make further recommendations of any changes we may need to make on the scheme.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to take some questions or feedback from the floor. Just do it one at a time, and we've got certainly quite a bit of time, so if you can keep them quite concise. Start with you.
Hello. At the beginning of your presentation, you said why you were doing the process in the first place, and it was because you had some feedback that a vehicle collided with a railing and injured a pedestrian, and pedestrians were stepping out in front of cars. That was the kind of pre-event, right? Just so I understand, how you've rectified these 2 issues is you've taken out the railings that protected the pedestrians from the cars, and you've made the pedestrian crossing the same level as the road. Surely both those things will increase the chances of both those things happening, which I think it has done away with.
I don't believe that is the case, honestly. We did take the railings away. There is a misconception that those railings are there to protect pedestrians. Those railings will not restrain the vehicle, and if the vehicle hits them, they will injure the pedestrian behind it. One of those accidents, whether they were just a snapshot of the accidents that were happening to reflect that people were being injured in that area and pedestrians were the most vulnerable in it. And one of those was a pedestrian who was injured, who was in that safe space from between those guard railings. There's a lot of evidence that shows the guard railings actually permit faster speeds, and the removal of the curb again encourages slower speeds. Although we have removed those guard railings, we have actually reduced the speeds in those areas, and actually the severity of any accident, if it did occur, would be less because of the reduced speeds, and the frequency of those accidents should be reduced, we believe.
But instead of taking away the railings, wouldn't it be better to keep the railings and then implement measures to reduce speed as well, rather than do one or the other?
Railings don't protect the pedestrians.
They don't protect them more than no railings.
They really aren't. If you have a vehicle hits that, on many occasions those railings have been hit, and people on that occasion were injured. There's an example of, I believe, on Centenary Way, not long ago, about 6 weeks ago, a vehicle actually crashed and ended up in the middle of the pedestrian island, in between all the railings. If a pedestrian had been there on that occasion, they wouldn't have stood any chance. Those railings didn't protect pedestrians. The purpose of railings is a historic use really in highways, and it's used to forward pedestrians to the route that is most efficient for vehicles to travel through the fastest, and that is why it's done. And in terms of the levels, although we did remove the levels and it is flush, again that does encourage slower speeds. The old footpaths and the carriageway had very severe cambers, which again were designed purely for the benefit of allowing motorists to travel through at a faster speed. And again, the removal of those has encouraged a slower speed.
Okay, I'll take another question.
Hey there, I just wanted to ask, why wouldn't you have made it a 20-mile-an-hour zone anyway? Because, like, you were saying, like, having that there, that was, have been, like, the kind of obvious idea in my view, anyway, but, because you'd be more likely to, you'd have the sign, people would be more likely to take notice of the sign, and because, like you say, the speed has dropped, but there's still going to be people going through at a really high speed, and if you're someone like me, I have cerebral palsy, I find it really difficult to gauge, sorry, I'm just trying to get the words out, I find it quite difficult sometimes to cross roads, because sometimes I will have near misses with cars because I naturally walk a bit slower. I just don't understand why not having it as a 20-mile-an-hour zone wasn't something on the plan in the first place.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think the key things, I think Simon touched on when he was presenting, is that with 20-mile-an-hour zones, you have to, the key part of it, they're very difficult to enforce. You know, the police don't have the resources to enforce it. So you have to make it almost self-enforcing by the physical measures you make, which we did. And one of the sort of key objectives, I suppose, we didn't mention in terms of the scheme, was in terms of the sense of place, the public realm, and to try and reduce the number of lines and signs around, you know, as a first principle. We've now decided to go to a 20-mile-an-hour zone, so there will be some more signs. And in terms of your, I understand what you're saying in terms of trying to judge. I suppose it's judge the speed and distance to make the decision to cross the road. I understand that, and that's a difficult one to respond to. All I can say is that we have got a facility in there in terms of push button that will stop the traffic if you and others need that.
Okay, further question? I'm pleased to hear there is going to be a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. Anyway.
I just want to pick up on what you said about the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit and the difficulty possibly of where that would start and end. But there's already a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit in Parson Road. Well, St Clement's Road goes through into Parson. And I know what you're saying is that it's sometimes difficult to make sure people keep that, but by and large people do keep that, and what they have a tendency to do in the past is to then pick up speed as they're going into Christchurch Road. Now if they knew that all of that area was a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, perhaps right through to where the crescent is, and then they can pick up where the road widens out more, that might be a better option.
We're in early days of the 20-mile-an-hour zone, to be honest, and we will take that on board. We haven't yet decided the extent, so feedback could be something we base our decision on. We will be consulting internally, and with those we have to, such as the police and other authorities, to do so. And as part of that, we could decide the extent and most suitability for the zone.
I'd say just in addition to that, from previous experience of 20-mile-an-hour zones and sort of safe zones around schools, etc., to make speed self-enforcing in cyclists, you normally have to deal with that by what we call vertical deflection. So speed humps, when push comes to shove and you start consulting on those interventions which are needed, you know, there's a lot of sort of anti-feeling to that in residential areas. So you know, it's not that easy. But we'll take on board your comment.
I think one of the things I've heard is there's no warning that you are coming into a zone, a shared space. So like I said, there's no proper signage nationally for shared space.
Yeah, which is what Simon touched on. Yeah, you're going to take the
if you come up Ashley Palmer,
Yeah.
St Clements and Palmerston Road, it's at 20 mile an hour, and then you're told that's finished, so you can speed up to
Yeah.
30, and then you're actually hitting up.
So that, as I said to you, it's the design of the infrastructure that gives people the perception of how to behave. That's the idea. But you know, Simon mentioned we are going to be introducing signs at the start on each approach.
Okay,
Hi, I'm speaking as a local resident, a disabled pedestrian, a car driver and a motorcyclist. Also, my partner drives a 5-ton recovery truck. On the front page of the Echo, there was a story quoting a bus driver saying that his vehicle had slipped on that road surface. My partner, who drives the 5-ton truck and knows the road well, so certainly would not be going in excess speed, has also felt his vehicle slip. I have yet to even contemplate riding my motorcycle around that corner. The drainage is useless. It's already got water lying on it. On the inside camber, coming from Christchurch Road towards Palmerston Road, you've got a great big manhole cover on the inside corner, which is now underwater when it's flooded. Right? I saw that when it was being built. The courtesy crossings have no demarcation or fluorescent paint to warn a motorist, far less a motorcyclist. Now, I appreciate all the great ideas about slowing it down, accident black spot, all the rest of it, but don't you have a duty of care to me as a road user? Now we're here, you're contemplating surrounding this open space with concrete bollards. So when I slam the brakes on my bike, on that corner, on the wet, to avoid the child that's running out because they've got no idea it's a road, I'm going to hit a concrete bollard. Absolutely outrageous. And you may not have had any motorcycle accidents yet. That is because the majority of my motorcycling friends, and I speak as a former officer of the Motorcycle Action Group, are avoiding it. God forbid a stranger comes down that corner, because you are going to have either a child killed because the bike cannot stop, or you will have a motorcyclist killed. And that is for definite.
Okay, I think there were a few points in there. If I start with the first one, which was the pavement material. The pavement material specified meets and exceeds the requirements of slipping for pedestrians and skidding for vehicles. It has been tested subsequently throughout construction and post-construction to make sure it does achieve those properties. I think. Well, I'm not aware of those incidents, but we don't know the details behind that. But the material meets the requirement it needs to meet, and as long as people are driving at the speed they should be no issues with slipping or skidding on that space. Next, you pointed out the no markings on the approach to the courtesy crossings. That's deliberately so, because the gradients of those ramps actually onto those courtesy crossings doesn't meet the requirement of a standard traffic count. They've been stretched out over such a long length that it's no different to any bump in any road of any normal gradient.
Excuse me, may I respond to that? Can I presume that you're not a motorcyclist, sir? No. And did you have any consultation from the Paraterial community? Are you saying that as a motorcyclist I accept a bump in the road is okay? A bump in the road that will have me off my motorcycle, especially in slippy conditions? You're saying that's acceptable? Are you saying that any dips, bumps in the road are now acceptable? No, that's basically what you're saying. You don't need to mark.
No, what we were saying was that the gradient at which the ramps are is no different to any other gradient change in the road, full stop. It's not a bump, it is literally a change of grade. It very slightly picks up in level. They're not speed humps, they're not traffic calming features. They are there to bring the road up to the footpath level, not for the purpose of traffic calming. Now they may have a slight traffic calming feature, which is a bonus, which is highlighted by the markings on the top, but that's not the actual sole purpose of them. The gradients was deliberately slack to prevent them being a road hump.
Was there consultation with motorcycle groups in terms of this scheme?
No, not specifically. We've got a list of statutory consultees, and as far as I'm aware, motorcyclists. Can I just pick up on one?
Make on that point,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to hog it, but
That's
I do
right,
think this
sorry.
is vital because nobody else speaking from this community. The Motorcycle Action Group is a national political lobby group, and it is consulted by Cabinet and the Department for Transport in London. So it is well recognised, and I'd be delighted to give you the details so that you can consult with a body that represents the rights of motorcyclists to stay alive.
We're happy to receive that, thank you. Can I just make, one of the things that concerned me about what you were saying was that you said there was some ponding and flooding down there. I mean, is that something you've seen very recently? Because it's not...
It's on the aerial photograph, you can see it, it's visible.
But when was the photograph taken? Very recently?
Yeah.
That corner that you talked about, we did have a bit of a problem right as we were constructing the scheme, but we thought we'd sorted it completely. So, and it's nothing we've seen physically ourselves. So,
and there's a number of concerns that have been raised with water on the road, and particularly coming into the winter with ice.
Yeah.
I mean, as a business owner, I mean, when this went to consultation in the first place, I said that we know, and there's a couple of other businesses said the same thing. They had seen cars skidding, hitting the barriers that were there when it got icy. So now,
previously.
Yeah, previously. So
I mean,
I'm wondering
as far
how.
as I'm aware, it is one of the routes that our operations people do grit. You know, because there are plenty of roads that we're not able to grit because they're more minor. But this is one of the key routes that is gritted. So. So I would like to think that
and also with surface water, if it's raining very heavily, when we had the crash the other night, I know that people did a runner and they may not have been drunk, but they crashed on that corner and it was raining heavily that night.
Was it related to the water?
I don't know. I mean,
you get a thin, in
one of the things I did notice the other day when I was looking at, because we've just had lights installed, for Christmas lighting,
okay.
And without road markings, especially lashing rain or heavy fog, you would, in the absence of road markings, look to the street lighting to tell you where to go, and until you would see the TARDIS coming out of the gloom or something like that, you would possibly just carry straight on, because there isn't anything to say it's a bend. If you weren't familiar with that being a bend, it does actually look like the road carries on in a straight line. So I think it's something to take on board.
Yeah, okay, so in terms of designing the
yeah, I mean, when you designed it, the Christmas lighting hadn't been, that's a fairly new thing. That's just that it had been installed about four days before that accident. So it's something I think it's, I personally think that, and that was raining heavily that night because I was awake. Okay, take another question.
As a local resident, and someone who is old enough to actually remember when the pedestrianisation wasn't there and you could drive straight the way through, could you please tell me what is the designation of that road? What is it? You say it's a main route. What is that route called? I'm not asking what it's, I'm asking for the road designation.
The Christchurch Road.
What is it?
The A35.
Sorry, the A35, a main trunk road. Right, that's fine. So the speed limit, to start with, is 30 miles an hour. Now you've gone around the certain houses about the 20 mile an hour zone. When you had the consultation done and had the scheme planned, what was the speed limit you request the designers to put in? Because you set the speed limit as per the local notes that are on the HM government website for shared spaces.
Okay, in answer to your first question, it is the A35, although it's not a trunk road. That's the first thing to clarify. Second of all, although, again, it is an A road, it actually carries equal volumes of traffic as to the back roads around Boscombe. So Percy Road and Nowers Road carry almost identical traffic to that road. So although it is called the A35, that does not affect how the road is used by local residents and visitors. And in terms of speed, we did discuss the 20 mile an hour speed at first. And again, as we said, there are various complications of going through 20-mile-an-hour zones. We believe we have managed to reduce the speeds without the signs. However, the signs will now further complement it.
No, I'm sorry, you haven't answered my question. What speed limit, when you set the design to be
30
created?
miles an hour.
Sorry.
30 miles an hour.
So you set it for 30?
But it is already 30. We don't set it for 30.
Okay. So you don't understand what the local notes say for shared spaces on the H&G government website, which says that one of the first things you do is to give a set design speed for the shared space to reduce speed.
20 miles an hour.
So you set it for 20?
Yes, that does not mean you have to mark it as a speed limit.
No, but I just wanted to be sure so we all know. Now, just as the lady behind me has commented on the skidding, and I have tried to report it to the council, and I got told by your call centre, I'm sorry, we can't deal with this, you need to take it back to the bus company. Because I was on an M2, coming from work in Poole, going home, late at night, because I finished work in Poole at 10:30. It was a wet evening, the bus wasn't going particularly fast, according to the display on the screen that everyone can watch on the TV. We were doing 21 miles an hour, and as we approached the corner, we started to slide. Now, I tried to report it, and I got told refer it back to Moorbus. If Moorbus call centre doesn't refer it to you because they think they have to keep it in-house, who are we supposed to report to?
To us.
And when I tried to report it to you, I was referred back to Moorbus by council employees.
Okay, what I would suggest as a first port of call is rather than going through our call centre, which I don't know why it wasn't passed to us, it's not like them to do so, but would to email our highways@bournemouth.gov.uk, and that will be then directly fed to an officer, who in this case will be me.
I would also say that we work very closely with both the main bus operators, and the only comments we've had in terms of the scheme, the only problems they've had are connected to the parking issues that we talked about. They've never mentioned anything about skidding. I mean, I'll ask them now, but they've never mentioned anything, and we work very closely with them.
We've had a couple of comments now. I know with the
The only thing to add to that obviously is that I can email the call centre people and highlight my name as a contact, as a direct contact, which they can put you straight through.
Okay.
They can, even if you phone in, can put you straight through to my phone number.
This is highways@bournemouth.gov.uk.
highways@bournemouth.gov.uk, or call the switchboard and ask to speak to myself at the highways, and they will transfer you to me.
Okay, and if anyone would like to copy in the Boscombe Forum onto any correspondence that does go to highways, that'd be handy for us to see what was going on. Thank you.
Just make a note as well, I was filming there today, a bus driver came up and spoke to me directly and said he'd also experienced skidding on that corner. I asked him to come down tonight, and unfortunately he was working. So.
What company was that?
He didn't say, I didn't ask him. I did invite him down. So
Okay, well, I think
but it's another instance of the same, repetition of the same thing.
It does surprise me that when you have accidents on things like pedestrian crossings and stuff, they put an anti-slip. That's a special coloured grippy surface. I'm very surprised that this is as grippy as that might be, and that wasn't used particularly on a bend.
Yeah. Again, pedestrian crossings are generally 30 mile an hour areas, so you're coming down from 30 to dead stop. Obviously,
You do have, if someone's crossing in front of you, you have to go to dead stop. So it's a very similar situation.
Why is there no markings on the corner by McDonald's to show the middle of the road? Because I watch it and I see so many cars going crossing into the other lane.
again, it's a method for encouraging slower speeds. People aren't often aware, but it's not uncommon in most of our roads around Bournemouth. We don't have centre lines. There's a lot of Christchurch Road itself, further along the road. Again, we do not have any centre markings.
Surely you'll get more head-on collisions without a centre marking.
We don't believe so. People shouldn't be using centre marking as their delineator to work out where they should be on the road. Drivers have to be responsible for their actions and read the road as it is. A driver shouldn't need a line to tell him where to be in the road.
Question that myself, but
I just wanted to ask why it's not coloured, because I have problems with my eyesight and I can't see where I could before. And I went straight across it and nearly got hit by a car because I couldn't distinguish it, because there's no colour.
I don't have all my eyesight.
This is it, because like they say about being like people who are visually impaired, but I lost a lot of my eyesight, and I'm doing a project in Boscombe, and I don't know the area, and I walked around it, and literally got hit by a car because I couldn't distinguish it, no at all. There's no colour, there's no curve. How does that benefit people who can't, like normal people, let alone people who can't really see?
To clarify, are you talking about the actual bend itself, or are you talking about, because there is a curve in there and there is a step within it?
There's no colour.
No, and that is one of the things that have been picked up, and one of the reasons we are now looking at this marking to the curve to help improve the conspicuousy of the change in materials. That has come as a reaction to the comments we are receiving on that nature.
Could I just talking about the curve, just as it goes round the corner, it drops away to nothing. That's where you get an access point there. Surely that is hazardous to blind people because there is no curve there, and also as it's difficult to delineate the actual thing. One of the musicians who comes to my bar, he fractured his ankle falling over there. I had an email today, someone you've actually spoken to in her 70s. She fell over the curb as well. You mentioned people tripping over the curb. And I think Lord Holmes's research suggests lots of people don't report these kind of tripping accidents. But on that particular space, there is no curve. I mean, is that something you're looking at?
Unfortunately, that's an issue all around town anyway. You have a pedestrian crossing or drop crossing in small isolated spots. There is no curve in those locations.
So how do blind people, how does that protect blind people then? Is there something for blind people to know that they...
You can install tactile pavings on those edges where required if it's over longer lengths generally. In that location, we haven't done, maybe that's something we can speak to the disability audit, and maybe something that's come up in the audit. And
that's just directly off the pedestrian precinct, that
is something we could look maybe to look into.
I would think so, definitely. Okay, I'm just going to take a question over here and then I'll come back.
The only other thing to touch on, obviously, about your Lord Holmes report is most of the Lord Holmes report is the lack of a curve, not the fact that we have one people trip on. Most of the concern in that report is there's a fear that people don't have a curve and can't navigate the space, which is unfortunate. It was kind of unforeseen circumstance from putting the curve in. We've opened ourselves up to other issues, and we've accepted that we need to make further actions, and we're trying to do so.
Right. Thank you, gentlemen. Basically, you're going to disagree with me, but I'll hit the hammer on the head. It's not fit for purpose. Because when you read the Department of Transport's reports and you do research, it seems like all these shared spaces are up for legal action. In fact, Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, they're actually displaying A-boards. And what actually happens is what's the cat out of the bag is the report says there should have been from the onset sufficient visual and tactical signals to enable pedestrians to be aware of the carriageway. So as the scheme stands now, do you now feel that you have put the council at risk of liability to negligence where you have created a trap and where it assumes a particular duty of care in relation to the highway user, the visually impaired and the disabled, and was that Disablement Act and Equalities Act taken into place? And will the council need to consider all avenues, signage, delignitation, speed limits, to reduce the liabilities that you may now face?
I think in a simple response, probably no. In terms of our design, we followed all the existing guidance to the letter. We've, in terms of the disability side of things, we've gone further than I believe most of the other shared space designs have followed. So, you know, and these court actions you talked of, which I read about, I mean, they are actions. There's no outcome yet. Obviously, you know, any change in government guidance or, you know, a direction we would obviously follow.
Yeah, just very quickly, you said about the consultation. I think I identified the gentleman from the Sovereign Centre. Have you got any data in which you've actually gone outside the code and talked to what I would call specific groups to understand their needs, because when you get 28 disability groups putting pressure on one council, I know we cannot look at it geographically and measure this one to other locations. Surely that's telling you something that really, you know, this is not a sort of safe scheme at this present moment of time. I mean, see, I understand what you're saying, because the Department of Transport did not come up with a sign. And the simple solution is to have a sign saying you are now entering a shared scheme, 20 miles an hour, with a pedestrian and a motorist. That's simple, that's not rocket science. But it does seem to me, and I'll be honest with you, I've even seen two of your employees in a council van, and I've got an email in which somehow the editor of the Echo did not print, doing something rather dangerous, quite prepared to forward on to Councillor Mike Greene.
He's sitting very close to them. I mean, just reiterating what I said about our consultation with DOTS, you know, that they're our standing consultee, and you know, we spent, yeah.
So they were our statutory consultee, but we also, in addition to that, carried out 2 disability audits, one pre-scheme, one post-scheme. I can't really go into the post-scheme much because I've only just briefly looked at my computer today. But we can make those available to people. They can be put on our website so people can read through those. But in general, I think they were rather supportive of what we did. We took the main 2 fears of those disability groups on board and have acted upon them. The first one was the crossing and the second one was the curve. A lot of the reports we're getting at the moment, shared spaces used is a very common term, like Ian said earlier. There's various scales and different natures of shared space all around the country. The one in Boscombe is very small in comparison. Really, it is only the bend. It's a bend in the road. Many of the shared spaces around the country are junctions with multiple arms, with huge traffic volumes, with a lot wider gaps across. It's a completely different nature to what we've installed. And the criticisms are the things that we have not, we have implemented on our scheme.
I think when Lord Douglas report, it said that a third of people actively avoid an area. So following on the reason why you did it in the first place was to encourage people to come shopping in Boscombe, remove the clutter, make it more appealing. There's something in place that at least on his research,
well, that's
a lot of people avoid. But I have also had a number of people saying they are avoiding the area, people with visual problems who can't see so well.
But that was a report based on 530 people throughout the whole of the country, so I don't think it's overly reflective of the shared space as a whole.
No, but I mean, I have heard that quite a number of times. We've heard it from the motorcyclists here. I've heard it from someone who's got visual problems. Is it something you are going to look at? You're going to do your own reports to how people feel comfortable in that space? I know that I was told categorically that this consultation for this particular scheme was the most comprehensive consultation that Bournemouth Council has ever done. That's on record from the council in charge of transport last year in the summer. Said it was the most comprehensive, which I find quite considering all the things that are happening afterwards, the things that haven't been done. Are you going to be doing a report on how people feel about this space?
Well, we are putting a report together with the various aspects such as the speed and elements like that. We haven't actually done any surveys of such. If it's decided necessary, we could look into carrying out those feedbacks. And although you said people have been detracted from that space, on many occasions it's this complete areas you're talking about. It's whole kilometres of roads that people have been detracted from. Within Boscombe we have got facilities, if you aren't comfortable in that space, that you can use. And I don't believe, although they may not be crossing, if the evidence is true, that they aren't crossing in that location, they're not coming to the area.
I think there's a lot of anecdotal evidence. A report would help maybe compile that.
Hi, I'm the treasurer for the Boscombe Forum, and just this afternoon we've got some research that came through from Bristol University in regard to shared space schemes across Europe. And basically, we haven't had a chance to read it through properly, but just looking at the abstract from it, what it's saying is that the evidence on behalf of going ahead with the shared space scheme is overstated, and that caution is needed in implementing it, and particularly with environments with high traffic flows, and that there's other information, you know, toward the back of just fine.
Is that the report by University of West England?
Yeah. So just wondering whether you've looked at that, and then because they go into detail about how women and older people particularly are negative about it, and that a lot of places in the continent where these schemes were originally put in, what they've ended up doing is then introducing more formal pedestrian line crossings and other various things. And demarcation lines to reduce vehicle speeds, etc. So what it seems is that these things have been put in place, they haven't worked out particularly well the way they were done, and so then they've had to modify them. I just wondered whether you'd seen this, and if you had seen it, why is it that in hindsight that modifications are being made? It might have been useful to put in place this research. It was published in 2013.
We have seen it, but as I said before, you know, we are duty bound to follow the guidance given to us by the Department of Transport and other bodies, which we do. And I can assure you, the design was carried out and the scheme was implemented in a very careful and thorough way. It certainly wasn't, you know, slapdash approach, I can absolutely assure you, and all things were considered, as I said, including the disability angle.
Just referring to the email I received earlier today from the lady, 70-year-old woman who fell over on the curb. She had a head injury, black eye, blackened nose, bleeding nose, and was so that spent a rough few weeks afterwards and sent home with a head injury leaflet. Yeah. She was called by the council, so you're aware of it, and you explained what you've said already. You put the curbs in for the Blind Association, so she just makes the point that she notices that most of the crossings haven't got curbs, and how does that relate to the Blind Association?
All the crossings do have a curb in front of the crossing. Unfortunately, we have to have them flush with the carriageway so they're not a tripping issue. So in a general controlled or in an uncontrolled crossing point where we use tactile paving, those are marked with a curb. They do have a curb, but it's flush with the carriageway. So they don't not have a curb, they just don't stand parallel with the carriageway.
Right. How does that work with the blind?
They have tactile paving.
Right.
So there is tactile paving on the thing which they can feel, and well, it's more by foot, so they walk onto it and put their sticks, and it identifies where the crossing points are.
And the dogs understand that as well.
Okay. Yeah, so it's not just the vertical element of it, it's actually the tactile nature of it horizontally as well, yeah. Which obviously people are trained.
And can I understand, because I had a discussion with Councillor Kelly about these, where they said, I said that I wouldn't stop at these things because it's not a marked out crossing, as in a pedestrian crossing, so I have no understanding of we didn't actually use it, and they said it is actually a crossing, you have to stop. That's what you said at the meeting we were in. But to clear this up, I mean, I have done some reading into it. A courtesy crossing is that you have to catch the eye of the person coming towards you.
You don't have to stop, but if a pedestrian is standing there, obviously waiting to cross, then many drivers do stop or slow down, and the pedestrian, if they feel confident, can start to walk. It's a kind of two-way thing. If you're not confident to catch the eye, you go to the controlled crossing. Can I just say something?
Yeah, I mean, so the problem with that is, or one of the comments, not just one comment, lots of comments about how people do that, and they end up halfway across the road, and then the people coming the other way, who they haven't caught the eye off, don't stop, and then they're sort of stuck in the middle. And then
I think if a car was coming along at a reasonable and sensible rate and saw a person standing in the middle of the road, they probably wouldn't stop.
Well, I saw someone very, very nearly get hit.
And it's not just confined to this kind of area. Could I just say something about the whole concept? The guys here have talked to us in a technical way, and they obviously understand clearly all the technicalities of how it was built, why it was built, and that sort of thing.
But I'd like to say from the perspective of Regeneration and what it's done for Boscombe, opening up the precinct, and I haven't heard anyone say anything but the place looks so much nicer. It's really improved the aesthetics. The safety aspect is something completely... The safety aspect is slightly different, and people take a while to get used to these things because they are different. And we have actually Ben Hamilton Bailey, who we initially consulted with, who explained the concept of shared space to us. He has washed his hands of it. He doesn't want to know because it is, in his eyes, not a shared space anymore because we have put control crossing in, we've put other safety aspects, we've put the curbs in, we've done a lot of things that make it safer for our residents and in response to comments from those residents. So it isn't actually technically a shared space. It is something which is uniquely Boscombe. It's for our residents. It's what we needed to open up the space and create a better
I think if there's no road markings, then if it's not a shared space, but there's no road markings, then what is it?
Well, it's a road. It's a corner.
You don't know what it is, that's the problem. You don't know.
It is a road.
You've got benches in the road.
No, we haven't.
You actually have.
Okay, I'll just take another question. Just to take a show of hands in the room. I have heard that a lot of people said it does look cleaner, looks better. That's people do tend to say that, but a lot of people say they feel. In terms of who thinks it's working well as a road, who put their hands up for people who think it's working well as a road. Shared space or not. We have 3 elected councillors with their hands up, and the people who don't think it's working well as a road.
Everybody else.
Is most of the other people, and people who are undecided about that. There's a few people who are undecided. So I'll take the question off. Go to MIHE Greene. Just have a bit
Thanks very much. First of all, thank you very much for people for inviting us. I'm Councillor MIHE Greene. I'm recently appointed the Councillor responsible for transport for Bournemouth Council. I just wanted to try, I was waiting to hear everything that has been said so far, and I can see that there are a few still hands up, but there are people who've spoken before once or twice. So I thought I just wanted to respond on a few of the things that I've heard this evening. And the very first one was talking about the barriers. And I know that Nigel, you mentioned about one of the cases at the moment against the Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, because they were really the pioneers as far as shared space is concerned in this country. It been happened all over the place, and I was actually a council responsible for transport in a neighbouring borough at the time when Kensington and Chelsea decided that what they were going to do. And they took somewhere that was actually a little bit busier than Boscombe or Horseshoe Common. They took somewhere that was a little bit, and a few more tourists than Bournemouth does, because one of the questions that I've seen somebody say in the paper that it's different in Bournemouth because you've got some people who know it and some people are tourists. What they did is they took Exhibition Road and they took all the barriers down and they made the whole thing into a shared space. At the time, Ken Livingstone was mayor of London, and Transport for London shouted and screamed, we're going to sort you out if you do this, we're going to be prosecuting you for this, we're going to prosecute you for that. And in the end, they stuck 2 fingers up, they took away all the barriers, they made the whole thing into a shared space, and they had a massive reduction in casualties and accidents. Why did that happen? Exactly as we heard before, because when you have the barriers, it is herding people into the space, and people try to get out of that space. And as they do so, they become more vulnerable. Now, I'm not saying shared spaces everywhere are a good thing, and I'm not saying that shared spaces everywhere are a bad thing. You've also got to remember that these shared spaces develop over time. Yes, they've been going for 20, 25 years around in the continent, Yes, they've been there for 10 years in London, but there are still debates about it. And there are debates between the different disability lobbies. There are the people with physical disabilities who said, we want no curbs. We want no vertical deflection. All the surfaces should be at the same level. At the same time, we hear from some of the blind lobbies, some of them only, who say we need to have this delineated. We need to know when you touch it with a stick that there is a change in level. And funnily enough, the Lord Holmes report that has been referred to a few times this evening isn't agreed to by the Royal National Institute for the Blind, which is on Judge Street in Camden, where they've been promoting shared spaces, and all of them actually at flush level, because that's what they want. What they wanted was to see a wide, fluorescent's not the word, but we're talking about the tactile paving, or a difference in surface, but also for the visually impaired who are not fully blind, to have a very clear strip which would be someplace reflected. Again, we've had other suggestions, but that's a bad thing. But what we're going to do in Boscombe, and what we'll be doing in Horseshoe Common, is to allow it to evolve, to look at where things can be improved, to listen to feedback like today, to listen to feedback that we've had from DOTS, to listen to everywhere and recognise that each shared space is different. And we need to look at what are the rights and the wrongs for that particular space. As far as the signage is concerned, we've had lots of suggestions. You need to have some sort of signage to tell drivers particularly that they're moving into a shared space. That's something that we're going to do, and we're taking a risk on it. Because if you have a sign that goes up, and it's not one that's been supported already by the Department for Transport, you stand a risk that that's going to be the next legal challenge to you. But we're going to take a risk, and we're going to put the signs up before they're approved by the Department for Transport, because we think the level of risk has actually tipped over, so it's more important, the feedback that we've had, to inform people that they're going into the space, than just to wait until somebody in Whitehall has ticked a box. Talking about the 20 mile per hour limit, and it's funny that some people talk about 20 mile per hour zone, and some people talk about a 20 mile per hour limit. The two are actually different in legal terms, and that is part of it, because a 20 mile per hour zone has to be what they call self-enforced, basically speed humps, and we don't want to have speed humps. A 20 mile per hour limit is something which can be imposed because speeds are already down to a certain level, normally 23 to 24 miles per hour at the 85th percentile. We've now been able to show through this that we are down to there, and so we should be able theoretically to put in the limit. We're going to take a risk and we're going to put in a zone. But it's not something that we could do right at the beginning without having speed humps. It's only because we're now able to show that there are other, what they call limiting factors, self-inflicting factors in the road, because we've been able to put it in place, to try it out, and to let it develop. We've been speaking today, obviously, all about the Boscombe. Well, because this is the Boscombe Forum. The Horseshoe Common one was the one that went in first into Bournemouth. Now, people talk about, and actually I'd like to say thank you to everyone today for not using the phrase accident waiting to happen, because that's something that just makes me want to bang my head on the wall. But these are, in Horseshoe Common particularly, and in this case as well, these aren't accidents waiting to happen. These were accidents that did happen. We've had 27 of them here in Boscombe in 10 years. In the previous 7 years of Horseshoe Common, we had 34, resulting in 36 people needing to receive medical treatment. In the 14 months after the changes have been made in Horseshoe Common, and it's too early to do the same sort of thing in Boscombe, one. The fewest that has happened in any
been to
Any other year?
chairman of the business forum. You got.
I find it difficult to credit the guy that went through at that sort of speed in the BMW, by the way.
No, there was another one
later. But the accidents that have taken place in Horseshoe Common, because we've seen those numbers, have reduced dramatically. Will they reduce? No, you can't. I'm afraid, Mr. Ryan. You can hold on a second, please.
Hang on, we'll just let him finish. Hang on, Linda.
Well, thank you very much, but I'm sure you'll get your chance again as you did earlier. If you were to take, if the accidents prove to not be reduced, we need to look at why it is. And that's why I'm saying again, we are listening to what the feedback is. Some of the decisions that were taken beforehand, for example, the 60mm curve, I wouldn't have done. But I wasn't the cabinet member for transport at that stage. But there you get that conflict again between those with physical disabilities and those with visual disabilities. So there are ways to develop this. I'm going to come back to what Councillor Kelly said just earlier. This scheme was not just about safety. It was about ensuring that traffic could get through at slower speeds, still as effectively as it was before, in fact more effectively because it's not starting and stopping so much, that there will be a reduction in casualty accidents, and I actually believe there probably will be, but my background's in mathematics and statistics, etc., when I was back at university, and I'd say it's too early to say yet whether it's been successful, even in Horseshoe Common, where all the evidence is there that it's been successful, but I'd still say that it's too early to do so. We are going to listen to what people say, we are going to refine this, and we're going to see how it works from a safety point of view. But there can be absolutely no doubt that as far as regeneration of Boscombe is concerned, I don't live in Boscombe. Now, you do, and you love Boscombe. How many people here are actually Boscombe residents, by the way? So probably about 20, 22, something like that. I don't. I'm over in Westbourne. That's where I'm coming from. Right? I would come to Boscombe now in a way that I would never have come to Boscombe 10 years ago. I would be more inclined to come to Boscombe now, to Boscombe Precinct, since the work has been done, than I would have been before, because it's a pleasant environment for me to be in. And I think you need to try to think to yourselves, what do we want for Boscombe?
Okay,
all of these factors come into consideration. We are listening, we will make things better, we will listen to what you have to say now, but the whole idea behind it is not a bad one.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Mike Greene, I'm just going to take the last couple of questions. It's Denise here at the front.
Are you going to do it in Westbourne? Because Westbourne's a bit of a mess,
actually, that's a really, really good question, if I may, because the answer, would I do it in Westbourne if I had the money to do it? Yes, absolutely no question at all. But what we've done in the council, what Bournemouth Council has done successively over the last 8 years, is to say, if we've only got a limited amount of money, which part of Bournemouth do we want to spend it in? Which part of Bournemouth do we want to spend that money in? And the answer is, Westbourne has less problems than Boscombe. If we have the opportunity to put money into Boscombe or into West Howe, that's where we tend to put the money. And less into the wealthy areas of the town.
Okay, I'm just going to look at this later. I'm up for hours.
I'd just like to say, you just hiked the prices of the car parking, haven't you, in Boscombe, to make more people want to come here. And what I'd like to say is, there's more people using the back roads now, aren't they, rather than using the high street. They're avoiding that safe space, shared space. Is that what you intended to do? Make the back streets busier, so there are no shops?
As far as I've seen so far, there has not been a reduction in the number of vehicles going through. However, it's something that we should look at. You're absolutely right.
Is there, in terms of the parking fines, it'd be interesting to see, what you raise in parking fines for the last year as against the last month. Because as a business there's a lot of people, I know it was suggested that people are deliberately parking, but you know, I saw a disabled lady going to the credit union bank, get a ticket from a parking warden. The police are calling parking wardens in late at night, at 8 o'clock on a Sunday night, because people don't seem to know, they just don't know that they can't park, particularly outside Effie's kebab shop.
I think there are some people who are genuinely confused by that, and it's something that you're absolutely right. I have to say, having seen some of the CCTV, etc., I would say the majority of people know very well that they shouldn't park here. There are some people who see the people illegally parked, look down, see there's no line there, or it's probably okay, isn't it? But there are definitely some people who are parking there without realising that it's restricted. And so we're going to be looking, hopefully, at different ways of advertising it. I'm reluctant to put yellow lines down, because I think, again, it just takes away the idea. And the whole idea, I know there are people here who are pedestrians, people who are cyclists, but the whole idea of shared space, to me, is something which says, you know what, cars have had it their own way for too long. Let's try to take this sort of space back and give it to pedestrians, give it to cyclists.
Can I just get some clarity then? Because you're the cabinet for portfolio holder for transport, and you call it shared space, and the cabinet member for Regeneration stood up and said it's not shared space. Could we have just some clarification just for the end of the meeting? What is it?
But once the signs go up, it'll be shared space. Once the signs go up.
So it's a shared space. When the signs go up, it'll be a shared space. As we come to the end of the meeting, I'll take one question here.
I just wanted to say earlier that I think it's really brilliant that the council officers and council they are listening to the public, that they're willing to take all this back and they're modifying things in relation to that. One of the things that said Councillor Greene was that in Horseshoe Common that accidents are down, but I noticed one of the comments on the Echo was that there's a barrier across at night. I don't know, I've been down that way in Heaton for many years. So is that true, or have you taken account of that in regard to the accidents, or what?
I'm not sure, I did see the comment. I'm not sure that those numbers he's given are quite correct, and also there would only be a small proportion of them. There is a barrier down which is stopping people going in between midnight and 5 AM at the moment. It's not properly working yet, so there are still quite a lot of vehicles in there at that time. But that is something that is a different problem that I'm working at the moment. Because the whole idea again down there was to try to make it so people stopping, and night was a particular problem, where people are herded behind those barriers and are trying to spill out and therefore onto the road, and that's where there's a conflict. So there are certain things to look at on that, and again we're going to be looking at Horseshoe Common as well as
Okay. I'd like to say that as the forum, and we're more than happy to help with any kind of garnishing of opinion and such. If you've got any questionnaires that we can put out to our social media, or we can put into the local libraries, or get people to fill out here, we're more than happy to help do that. I think one of the biggest concerns that I've heard today is the issue of skidding, that we've heard about 3 or 4 things. I think that needs to be urgently looked at, because if a car did skid or a bus, it could go into pedestrian areas.
Sorry, just to say, we will absolutely get that looked into, because as it gets icier, as we get more floods, as it gets icier, if there is a problem, it's going to get worse, and absolutely that needs to be looked at urgently.
Okay, fantastic. All right, well, I'd like to thank everyone who came along tonight. I'd like to thank